or not, depending on what we want to do. I'm Laurie Sibley, and my resume for why I get to talk about this is I majored in elementary education and early childhood education, and then I got my master's in teaching literacy. I taught first grade for several years, and then I stayed home to take care of children. And so since I've been out of the classroom, I've done a lot of work with leveled books, which are books that are written on specific levels for beginning readers to help them learn specific things. And I've done both sides of it. I've gone through teachers' classroom libraries and put the books in levels, like easiest to hardest, and then I've written lots of leveled books. I think there's like 7 of them that are published that look like an actual real book, and then there's a whole bunch that I worked for an educational publisher kind of person who ran a book club for teachers, and they could buy the book club, and then every month they would get a leveled book on 4 different levels, like the same story on 4 different levels with activities and lesson plans and stuff that went with it. So I wrote those books for her. So I can't give them to you because she owns them, not me. But the disclaimer for this is that there are 7,000 ways to teach reading and 7,000 opinions about what the best ways are. Yesterday, when I was on Instagram, instead of working on this presentation, I came to some random teacher's post about how half the things that I had in my presentation already were completely wrong, and I was like, we just make things up, and we call them different names, and they're all the same thing that have been around for hundreds of years. There's all kinds of different research, and there's all kinds of different stuff, but this is what I think works. So this is the Laurie's version of what you should do. And the very first thing is this rule. Reading and writing are 2 sides of the same coin. You learn to read by writing, and you learn to write by reading. So in my opinion, you can't teach either one of those in isolation, especially when you're first learning how to read and write. Because at the same time as you're struggling to figure out what these squiggly pictures mean and what sounds they make and how they translate to words, at the same time you're struggling to put the sound in your own head into those squiggly letters, then you're coming at the problem from 2 different angles, and together you learn to read English. So I think learning to read is very similar to the way that we learned oral language, which is by immersion. When you were born, or your kid was born, you immediately started talking to them, and you spoke sometimes in baby talk and sometimes in complete sentences, even though they were, 1 week old and couldn't possibly have any idea what you were saying. But you just talked. You used language all the time with them. And then when the baby first started learning to talk and made their first, cooing sounds, you weren't like, oh my gosh, that's not a sentence. You're doing it wrong. You were like, oh yay, good job. And you talked back and you interacted over the language. And you also, if they were holding a ball and say, ba, you're like, yes, ball. You say the whole word. You might put it in a sentence like, you have a ball, or you can throw the ball. But you take their little initial attempt and build onto it from there. So that's what we want to do with our beginning readers. We want to immerse them in the language of books and the language of stories, which you've probably been doing all along. The very easiest way is to read aloud to them. Reading wonderful stories, helping them to fall in love with story. You get to know story language. You know that once upon a time is really a phrase that only occurs in a book. You know that probably, if there's one bear, there's gonna be two more bears, because fairy tales always have things come in threes, or seven dwarfs. Just little things that are like little code and little language of stories that it's a unique language, the language of books and stories. And I think that we are born with an innate love for story and understanding story, and that's why, ages ago, before anyone wrote any books down, they told stories orally, and they entertained one another with stories, and they connected over story. We have collective family memories that we remind each other of and tell the story of the funny things that each other did. So reading aloud to kids, no matter how old they are, when they can read for themselves, you can still read aloud to them, because you're probably still a better reader than them, at least in the beginning. And you can continue modeling, like we were talking about for learning oral language. When we read aloud, we model what a story sounds like, and we use story words. If in normal conversation, you might not say, like, she said reluctantly. Like, the word reluctantly is only coming up in a book. You don't usually, you might if you're like me, but you don't usually use the word reluctantly unless it's in the context of story. But it's in tons of stories. And if you have been reading aloud and your kids are familiar with these story-related vocabulary words, later on when they encounter them, they're gonna, they've never seen the word reluctantly. It never has occurred to you to teach the word reluctantly, but they're gonna recognize it and be familiar with what it means. Even if they can't actually define it, they'll know what it means from hearing open stories. There's also audiobooks. Kids can listen to audiobooks from tiny all the way to adult. And we want to immerse them in old favorites that we read over and over and over and over again. Can't tell you how many times we've read certain books at our house. And just as important is having new books to choose from and going to the library and switching out stories, and you'll learn new favorites that way, and you'll find ones that never should have been published because they're so poorly written. But just having so much, an abundance of book and an abundance of story. And then when it's time for your kid to actually start being a reader themselves, they've already got all of this language. And I meant to bring Legos, but I forgot. So you have to imagine that I have one of those little green flat Lego building bottom pieces. And every time you read a story, it's like you're adding a Lego. And if you read aloud 7 books, then your tower is 7 books high. And if you take a child to kindergarten or first grade with a massive Lego tower of books and story, then they're so far ahead and so prepared to begin to read. Rather, if you send them with an empty green slate to school and they've never heard a story, or they've never, and that's part of the disparity between children in poverty and children in middle and upper class, is if you've had less opportunity to be read to, you come a million books behind your peers of the same age and the same stage. But if you can immerse your child in the language of stories, they're way ahead of things. Okay, so there's 3 ways to read. This is what I tell kids, especially older siblings who are explaining to their younger sibling that they can't read, or the little kid feels left out that they can't read. The first way is that you look at the pictures and you make up your own story about what's happening in the pictures. And that is an amazing way to read. You can enjoy that story and those pictures so much. You can tell it to yourself, you can tell it to someone else. That's one way to read. Another way is to look at the letters and the words and point to the ones that you recognize. Like, there's an L, that's in my name. There's the word the. That's a great way to read. A third way is to read the sentences the way the author wrote them. That's what we typically think of when we say reading. Okay, so there's so many methods for teaching reading. There's so many different curriculum options, and over the last 50 years, the pendulum has swung this way, and then it's swung this way, and then it's gone back to just phonics, and then it's gone to balanced literacy, and then it's gone back over here, and there's leveled books, and there's sight words, and there's guided reading, and you know, it's overwhelming, all the different options that there are to do. And a lot of times people think that phonics is the most important. And kids have to learn phonics. It's an excellent way to get into a word, but you can't do only phonics, in my opinion. And here's an example. One of my kids said, "Mom, what makes the ah sound?" Well, the answer to that question could be virtually any seemingly random combination of letters. It could be a short O, it could be a short A, like an all. I said, "What word are you writing?" "Pause." Well, that didn't even answer my question. I said, "Pause like puppy dog pause?" "No, pause like pause a movie." So there are approximately 75 to 100 phonics rules that are typically taught. And in reality, they're nothing more than hints about how the letter might be pronounced in any given word. If you are going to program a computer to convert English text to speech, you have to teach the computer 500 rules. And that's just phonics, like letter sound rules. That's not even counting the 3,500 grammar rules that we know, like internally. So it's an overwhelming proposition to try to teach a kid to read, right? So here's how I think we should learn to read. There are 3 cueing systems. I don't actually think I wanted those to overlap, but it's gonna be a fun Venn diagram. All right, so the first one is meaning. And good readers use all 3 of these cueing systems at the same time. We got meaning, syntax, and visual. And we'll explain this. Okay, so meaning. Children expect stories to make sense. And the closer the content is to their own experiences, or a subject that they know a lot about, then the more capable they are at predicting what's going to happen next, or even what words are going to happen next in a sentence. And they draw implication from their own life. They draw information from stories that they've read. Like, for example, a dinosaur book. When a kid comes to a confusing part, he's going to use his background knowledge combined with his knowledge of how reading works and letter-sound relationships, so that when he comes to the word Tyrannosaurus Rex, like, you really can't sound out Tyrannosaurus Rex. I mean, possibly you could, but it'd be a lot of hard work. But if this sentence has said, you know, the scariest meat-eating dinosaur is, and then there's a giant word that you don't know, but you're thinking about the meaning, then you already know that says Tyrannosaurus Rex, because you already know what the giant meat-eating dinosaur is. And that's part of the immersion. You know, they've already had so much experience with stories and how they should happen. They can use their context clues. And so this is context clues, and that includes pictures. So when a child is reading and you can see their eye move from the sentence up to the picture. It's like an instinct is to be like, no, like, look at the words. But they're using context. Like, this sentence is literally, the dog can eat. So if you've got the dog can and you come to this word and you're not sure what it is, well, there isn't any context in the dog can. You know a lot about dogs, but like, not enough to help you figure out this word. But the picture of the dog snarfing food out of his bowl tells you immediately the dog can eat. So using the pictures is part of using the context. So we want them to use pictures. And the best books for kids are ones where author and illustrator have made the picture and the words match so that the kid can use them as context. So if you see your kid looking at the picture, you can even congratulate them for using a great strategy. Oh, I see you looking at the picture, that is so smart. Okay, the next one is syntax. And this is the structure and grammar of a sentence. So from speaking, kids know how a sentence should work. So if they are reading along and if they read the dog can eating, they should be able to think the dog can eating is not a sentence. It must not be eating. Let me look again. Oh, just eat. There's no ing in there. So their knowledge of how language works helps them with their reading. Visual is the letter-sound relationships. And that is the phonics. That's that you know that, if you come to the word dog and you don't know what it is, and you get your mouth ready for that first sound, the dog can eat. And a lot of times, you might not even need to sound out every single letter in this word because you're also using meaning and syntax to go with your visual. So if you say and there's a picture of a dog, you don't have to sound out the whole word because you know that says dog right away. And that's good because a good reader uses all three of the cueing systems at the same time. They might, if they get stuck, they might choose one of them to rely on, but in general, when I'm reading, all of these things are working magically behind the scenes in my brain at lightning speed. I don't think about that I'm using them until I come to a word that I've never seen before, and then I'm like, okay, maybe I can, I recognize that prefix, then all of a sudden you start doing some word work. Okay, so write down meaning and does that make sense? That's gonna be your cue when your child is stuck or they've read a sentence and made a miscue, they've done it incorrectly and they've read something wrong. You can say, does that make sense? And instead of telling them the correct word or reading it to them, you can send them back to do the work themselves. Does that make sense? Oh. And then they can start thinking and self-correcting. The question for syntax is, does that sound right? Like if I say, the dog can eating. Does that sound right? No, that does not sound right. And the question for visual is, does that look right? So if the sentence is the dog can eat and the kid reads the puppy can eat, that sentence is syntactically correct. The meaning makes perfect sense. But does that look right? And you can even point to the specific word and they'll be like, dog, must be dog. All right, there's five things that the expert says that every child needs in their toolbox to be able to learn to read. So let's go through those. We've got phonemic awareness. And phonemes are the basic building blocks of spoken language. Within the first few months of your kid's life, they started making phoneme sounds. And beginning to have phonemic awareness. So you can work on phonemic awareness with kids before they're ever ready to start reading. And phonemic awareness is just the oral sounds. It is not connected to anything written down yet. So there's some phonemic awareness games to help play with sounds. And the experts would say that you should do this every day for like 10 or 15 minutes, just playing with the sounds. And you want to do both breaking apart activities and putting together activities. So rhyming is a phonemic awareness game. Like if you're driving down the street and you say, okay, let's play the rhyming game. I'll go first. Spoon. And then the kid has to think of moon. And then you have a turn. And you go until you run out of words. And they can be nonsense words. I mean, foon and spoon rhyme. That's a perfectly great rhyming word. And then, they maybe can think of a word and you go back and forth. And what you're doing is their ears are hearing, they don't know that you're talking about word families. Like you're not saying, we're gonna talk about the at family. All these words have the at sound and we're just gonna change the beginning sound. At some point, you'll say that to them. But right now you're just playing with the rhymes and the sounds. Syllables. You can break words up into their syllables, like I'm gonna say someone's name and you guess what I'm talking about. Jessica. Whose name did I say? And I mean, that's easy, but syllables is something that no child has ever heard of before until you introduce. And you don't have to say, we're playing the syllable game. You can just break up Jessica and then say it fast, Jessica. And you're just having so much fun playing with phonemes. There's a game called Troll Talk, where there's this troll who likes to give presents to people, but he doesn't want to give it to them until they can guess what it is. And so he'll say in his troll voice, I'm gonna give you a bicycle. And the kid has to guess what it is. And then the troll was so happy and can give them the gift. And then later on you can break it down even further into the actual phoneme level. And the troll's gonna give you a b-I-k. What's the troll gonna give you? I'm gonna give you a b-I-k. So, those are fun games. You could do it with objects, this is kind of stapler. Is that 2 syllables? Stapler. You could say, if you had a bunch of objects on the table, like I'm thinking of the st-a-blur. Like you don't have to do every single sound, just like, break it up. And what word am I saying? You could do it with pictures and books, or you could probably find picture cards somewhere on the internet and print them out. So eventually you're gonna get down to just the initial and final sounds of words and the phonemes. So when you're doing just those little tiny sounds, you want to remember to just make the sound, but not add an extra syllable on it. Like for the letter B, it makes the b sound. It doesn't say buh, it says b. And D says d, not duh, and all those words. Because when you are gonna end up sounding things out, you don't want to be sounding out duh, guh, because that's not a word. You just want d, g. So you gotta just say those little tiny short sounds. The next big idea that they say every kid should do is phonics, which are the letter-sound relationships. And you can basically do the same games again, but this time you're attaching a letter, like an actual letter, whether it's a magnet letter or letters written on index cards or letter tiles. And then you can play games like this is too small, can you read this? So here's these letters, m, and n. Now, we're gonna make a new word. You're gonna take away the M. What would happen if you put a on there? And pan. So just playing with the words, playing with the sounds. Almost the same, except now you're attaching it to actual letters. Sight words are words that generally are not sound outable, like the word the. A kid will have to read the word the all the time, but they couldn't possibly sound out and find the word the. So the idea for sight words, and I didn't really mean those all to appear stressed you out to write them fast, but some people call them high frequency words, or word wall words, or popcorn words, because you're supposed to be able to read them really fast. So a fun way to do sight words is to introduce 5 new words a week. And every day, you're just gonna review those 5 words. And you might put them up on the wall, because then it's fun to take a pointer or a stick or a magic wand and point to the words and have the child read them, or have the child point to them as they read them, or, you know, set a timer and see how fast they can read all the words, and then see if they can beat their time and read them a little bit faster. And they're just memorizing what this entire word looks like, as if it's a picture. Instead of trying to think of the in its separate phonemes or its separate phonics, you're just trying to think of the as like a unit. So this is, I'm gonna teach you how to cheer the words. You might have to stand up because it's more fun. All right, here's the word the. Now, if we were writing on our first grade paper, the fits into the lines like this. T is a tall letter, H is a tall letter, E is a short letter because it only comes up to the midline. If it was the word they, that's a hanging down letter. That's what I call them, is hanging down letters. The letter I is a short letter, but the dot goes above. Okay, so if you're gonna cheer a word, you have to be like a cheerleader. You say the, T, H, E, the. And it's so fun. If you do pig, you would say pig, P, I, G, pig. And kids love that. Like, they think it's so fun. But what you're doing is you're drawing their awareness to the shape of the word and the shape of the letters. Another activity you can do is write the word and have them draw a house for the word. It helps if you write your letters straight so the house looks good. And if you have your 5, I call them word wall words, 5 high frequency words. So you've got pig, this, I don't know, hat, that's not a high frequency word, neither is pig, but you know what I mean. And then you can draw a house, and you gotta figure out which of those words would fit into that house. Because of these words, only hat can fit in here, and then they could write it in the house. So having them draw houses, you drawing empty houses for them to fill in, it's a fun way to do it.
Can I, my pen just ran out. Does anybody have an extra I can borrow? I can run out to my car if you don't. Sorry to interrupt.
Here's one.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Sorry to have to interrupt.
No problem. And if you want more too, go ahead and work through.
One thing, when you were talking about making like build Pan, change it from name to Pan, one thing that I did with Millie was, it takes a minute to come up with all the words that you can make, like with, you know, certain set, but I would hide the little cards around the room and let her find those, and then we go to the table and build them and switch them out, and
Yeah.
so that's
That's fun.
anytime we can add a game.
And there's books that will have like pages of lessons. Like if you're gonna do something with the word spider, this is the mystery word, and you're gonna use all of these letters, and you're gonna do, I can't think of any words that go in spider. But you would have them build rid, and you would have them build ride, and rides. That is a terrible example. But at the end, they try to make a word that uses all of the letters. And that's fun. It's more fun if you have a book that tells you what to do, so you don't have to try to think of that on your own, because clearly it's harder than it should be. On the back activity is if you take a high frequency word and you do something else to it. Like if a high frequency word is ride, then you can, how would you change this word to go in this sentence? Susie rides her bike. And then you've got to figure out you're gonna put S on the end, or, if the words want, how would you change it to add, to be wanted, or wanting, or whatever. And you can use your high frequency words, or any of your words, to do rhyming spelling games. Like if you can spell ride, then you can spell pride, or you can spell side. You can't spell died, because that doesn't follow any of the rules, but you can have fun with that. There's a game called, if I can spell blank, then I can spell blank. So if I can spell car, I can spell, and then try to think of all the words you can spell if you can spell car. Far, jar, tar, card. That's all I can think of. Another fun word wall game, or sight word game, is the Be a Mind Reader game. And so the kid writes down numbers 1 through 5 on their paper. And the first clue is always, it's one of the words on the wall. So they just guess which word it could be. And then you give another clue. It has 4 letters. And then they look at them and they see which one it could be, and they pick one and they write it down. It begins with W blend. You know, remember the WH blend? W. And then, oh, okay, so it could be what or when. And then the last clue is, it begins this sentence, blank will lunch be ready. And then, by then, surely they figured it out, and then you can look back and be like, okay, look at that, you figured it out at number 3, or I've only done it in a classroom of children where you're like, who figured it out at number 4? Who figured it out at number 3? All right, the next thing that they say everybody needs to be able to read is vocabulary. The ability to understand and use words to acquire and convey meaning. And this, you can teach vocabulary formally if you want to, and introduce some vocabulary words that go with your history unit, or your science unit, or the story that you're going to read this week. Or vocabulary can just kind of soak in through read-alouds. You know, if you ask somebody what a coal chute is, nobody has any experience with a coal chute. But if you've read Harry the Dirty Dog 25 times, and they know what a coal chute is because they've seen Harry play in it and get all dirty, and you've already talked about it. So then when they ever come to the situation in history or wherever that they're learning about coal chutes, they already know what it is because they've got this picture in their head. And I think that sight words can count as vocabulary words when the children are little. Comprehension is the ability to intentionally interact with the text to extract meaning. That is such a scientific meaning. Do they understand what's happening in the story? And you can check their comprehension by asking them to retell the story, which is where there's a difference between retelling and summarizing. Summarizing is when you take all this information and you boil it down to a short sentence or two. Retelling is where you tell everything that happened in order. And you can work on comprehension by having them respond to their reading, whether that is writing about what they read, or asking questions like, who was the bravest in the story? Or what would you have done if you saw the big dinosaur in the cave, or whatever. And the last one is fluency, the ability to effortlessly and automatically read words in connected text. And that includes both the speed at which a kid reads, because when you first start out, they're gonna be reading the dog can, eat, there's no fluency there. But eventually you want them to be reading, the dog can eat. And then eventually you want them to be reading, the dog can eat. And the other part of fluency is expression. So their comprehension and their understanding of meaning helps them to put emphasis on the correct word. It's hard to be expressive with the dog can't eat, but if the sentence was, the giant spider dangled right in front of my face, you can show what it means by the fluency of your expression when you're reading it. Okay. So there's this thing that teachers use called running records. And this is going to start out feeling like hard and complicated and like you don't really, really want to do it. But I honestly don't know how to teach children to read about it. So I'm going to tell you about it. So running records are a written down picture of what the child is doing while they're reading. And we take them for a couple of different reasons. One is to assess the text's difficulty. And that is based on the child, because 4 different children could read the same book and it'll be super hard for one kid and super easy for another kid. And we can listen to our kid read and we can hear them stumbling along and think this is too hard for them. But a running record lets you really know with actual data and math how hard or too hard is it. There's 3 different levels that books should be. When a kid's reading all by themselves, we call that their independent level, and that means they're reading with 95 to 100% accuracy, because we want them to be practicing flawless reading, not struggling reading, or making up what they think the word is and just stumbling through all by themselves without any assistance. So, 95 to 100% accuracy is a very small margin of that you're going to allow them to have error before you can say, yeah, go for it. This is an independent level. Its instructional level is 90 to 94% accuracy, because you're sitting right there and you can say, did that make sense? Does that look right? And offer help to help them as they're internalizing the cueing system and the strategies. And then frustration is 80 to 89% accuracy. And that's when the kid is making so many errors that they can't possibly be able to figure out what they're reading about. And they hate you and the book and reading in general. So that means that anything lower than 80%, they have no business trying this book. So that's what running records can help us figure out. More importantly, I think, is that running records capture their progress and help you to talk about what the child was doing while they were reading and help that draw their attention to the work that they're doing. We call that metacognitive thinking, which is a giant word to mean thinking about thinking. And it just means the things that you do and I do automatically when we read, we have to specifically point out to our kids as they're learning. I saw you look up at that picture. That was a really great idea, because that helped you figure out what was happening in the story. The kid did that, but they might not have really known that they were doing that. But pointing it out to them suddenly is another tool in their toolbox. And the next time they come to something that they don't know what it is, they can think, check the picture. And that is an awesome tool. So okay. So I'm gonna draw a running record real quick. So I just write down the page number. A lot of times we're starting with books that are 8 pages long. There's one sentence on each page. So this isn't too complicated. So it says, a bee, said Baby Bear. That's the first line. So we're on page 2 probably, because they don't usually start on page 1. And the kid is reading, and they read, a bee, said Baby Bear. I'm just gonna put a check mark for every word that they read correctly. And then, maybe this is the same page. The next line says, where is he going? Where is he going? Okay, so then we come to a line that says, Baby Bear looked in the tree, okay? This is page 3. And the child reads, Baby Bear looks in the tree. But the word is actually looked. So you're just gonna jot down what it should have been underneath, and on the top, you put what the child says. So the sentence is, let me write it over here. And the child reads, Baby Bear looked in the tree, okay? And we just wanna mark down what the kid did. So we say, Baby Bear looks, and then the child read it again and they corrected it. And I always just put a check, but apparently just put a self-corrected. And then maybe they repeated it and read it again. So then later, you can go back with your kid and say, okay, look at this sentence. You read, Baby Bear looks, and then you realize that doesn't look right, and you fixed it, you self-corrected. Baby Bear looked, and then you said it one more time because you made sure. Sometimes kids will run the whole sentence again, and they'll say, Baby Bear looked. Baby Bear looked in the tree. And you just are marking it so that you can go back later with them and see what they're doing. Talk about it with them. Draw their attention. When a kid fixes an error, it's called a self-correction, and that is not an error any longer. Your kid could self-correct 25 times on the same page, and none of those are errors because they're doing the really hard work of using all those cueing systems and realizing that was wrong. Look, how can I fix it? And going again.
So if they didn't realize that, and you said, before you went on, you went back and said, does that look right? And then they corrected it, is that like if you have to tell them to go back and look, would you say that's an error?
Technically it's an error. I mean, you can just kind of decide, because the government's not looking at this and seeing like, no one's checking it. If I told the kid, I would write an A if I did an assist, like I gave them a cue to go back and look. Sometimes they just don't know the word and you're just gonna tell them, and then I would write a T for told. But I try not to get in the way of the kid reading unless it's really going to destroy the whole story. Like if it says Baby Bear looked in the tree and they read volcano, like, we gotta fix that, because nothing's gonna make any sense anymore. If we think there's bees in the volcano, like, it just isn't gonna work. So there's all different, and I didn't actually make a copy of this, but we could, if you're interested. I didn't know how, like, overwhelmed you might feel looking at this, but there's all different ways to code it. You know, the R means reread, SC means self-correct, T for told, A for assist. But the most important thing you want is to write down what they said, and then underneath put what it was, so that it just helps you remember what it was. You can also look at page 3, and you know, here's the sentence. there's 5 check marks, so it must mean that word was. And if the kid is reading too fast, you can either say, okay, slow down, sorry. Or you can be like, I don't need a running record on this book because they're doing fine. Baby Bear looked in the tree, just to finish out the sentence. Sometimes they'll skip a word, and then if they skip the word looks, I would just write. But then if they self-correct and went back and figured out it was there. Sometimes you'll have a kid who will read along, and they'll say looks for looked, and then they'll read along, and all of a sudden at the end, they'll realize and they'll go back and read it correctly. And you can just kind of mark it. So then at the end of the story, you would just count up all of the errors, which we don't have any errors written on our board at the moment. And then you can do the math problem, where you count how many words there are total. Let's make it be 100 to make our life easier. And here's your ratio. Errors over the total number of words. So if they made, this is math, I don't know why I'm doing math in front of people. But if they made 2 errors out of 100, what's that? What's that answer?
198,
right?
Yeah.
So that's an independent level. If they had made 10 errors, then they're at 90. That's the bottom edge of the instructional level, but that's okay because you're sitting right there. That'll work. If they made 15 errors, you don't want that book yet. Back up and find one that's a little easier. If you want copies of these things, I'll be happy to give them to you. So you want to talk with the kid about their running record. It's not like a test, it's just like, this is gonna help us talk about your reading at the end. Discuss the strategies that they used. Taking a picture walk. This is another metacognitive thinking thing where you take a book and before you even start reading it, you walk through each page and talk about what's happening in the book. Now you've built their context for this whole story. They know what's gonna happen. You even can feed them some of the sentences. Like if it is a book about some kids who are playing with the jump rope, and you know your kid doesn't know what the word jump rope, you can point it out while you're on your picture walk, and you can be like, look, this word jump rope is gonna come up a lot in this story. But mostly a picture walk is just about the pictures. And if there's a page where, what's a jump rope situation that could happen? Like maybe the story is gonna say, Lucy missed a jump, but your kid says, oh, she tripped, because that's what it looks like in the picture. You can say, yeah, she missed a jump. You know, like you're feeding that word, those words into their little brain so that later when they're actually reading and looking at the sentences, you know, they want it to say, Susie tripped, but then they're gonna get to Susie missed a skip step or whatever, you know, help them get ready. And a connection journal is a fun other way, and you can make connections between different books and between a book and your own life or between a book and the world. And we just put little, like I don't remember if I actually did a connection journal like written down with my kids at home, but in school we would have like a class connections journal, and if we read a story and someone made a connection, they were like, oh, Susie made a connection, then we would write it down, you know, Susie likes to jump rope too, and then we would label it with the little code. Text to self, text to world, and then text to text is if, we read a jump rope book yesterday. Oh yeah, those two books, text to text. Just like paying attention to what we're noticing and what we're thinking about. There's some handouts that I have, and there are some strategies on the back pages, and those are other things that you can talk about. Stopping to think, all kinds of things. The most important thing that kids need to read, though, is time with Just Right books, and those are books that are either at their independent level or their instructional level. What I like to do is start a kid with a book with me, and then once I know that they've got it, then I'll let them have it for themselves in there. I had like the gallon-sized Ziploc, and you can fit a lot of little tiny skinny books in there. They can have like 10 Just Right books at a time, that then when it's time for them to read by themselves, that those books in that bag, they've already read them 17 times and they know what to do with them. But kids like to read things over and over again, so they're not even sad about it. A lot of times, Just Right books are predictable books, which means that they have sentences that start the same way on every page. The dog can eat, the dog can run, the dog can sit. So the only real work that they're doing is with that last word. I mean, this is at the very beginning, One of the problems with focusing just on phonics is that you end up with books that say the bug can hop, the cat did sit, and those were all sound-outable words, but never in the history of ever did a sentence really say the cat did sit like that. So when you're reading that kind of book, you're divorcing the child from being able to use all their cueing systems, because that doesn't make sense. That doesn't sound right grammatically, and it doesn't make any sense in our heads of how language should work. So they only are able to use the visual cueing system for that book, which just makes their job harder. Your magic reading finger is the one where you are pointing to every word as you read it. And this is a very important strategy, especially because the book is really easy. The dog can eat, the dog can sit, they memorize that already. So you don't know if they're really reading unless they have their magic reading finger in and they're pointing to every word. Because then when they know, it says, the dog can sit, but they have to actually point to the when they're saying the, and dog when they're saying dog, and sit when they're saying sit. So you want their magic reading finger to go in. And you'll see a kid who's in 4th grade reading along and coming to a part where they get confused, and you see your finger. You might do it yourself if you're reading a textbook and you're like, wait, what? And you're slowing yourself down, you're putting your magic reading finger in and helping yourself with all of your strategies that you know.
If you have to, if the child has to stop and sound out a word, do they still get a check for that? Okay.
Yes, they do. Beginning readers read out loud, which is great for us because that means we can listen in and see what they're doing. If you have a whole class of 1st graders all reading at the same time, that room is the loudest thing you've ever heard of in your life. But as they get better at it, they start to internalize and read inside their heads. But at the beginning, they just can't do it because it's too, there's already too much effort going on. But it's really great because you gotta hear what they're doing anyway. And then reading the same books over and over and over again is a great way for practicing those Just Right books.
But the read-alongs can be, if I'm reading, it can be above their levels.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay.
And that's why you want to do that, because if your only diet of story is the dog can eat, like, why would you want to learn to read? Like, this is terrible and boring. Why is this something I want to learn how to do? So you also want to give kids time to write, like real world writing, like, we're gonna go to the grocery store, will you help me make a list? And, you know, have the kid write down the list, and this is best if you only have to get like 7 things and not 85 things. And when kids are just at the beginning stages of learning to do this, like, we don't care if they're spelling them right or not, because the work is coming from listening to the sounds and hearing them. So if they're trying to write the word lizard and they go lizard, like that says lizard, 100%. Maybe they'll even hear that lizard, put an R in there. But like, you know that says lizard because you just watched them write it, and they know that says lizard. That is what lizard says. Later on, they're gonna be able to, as they grow, they're gonna be like, it is lizard. There you go. But all of those attempts, I mean, I know it drives some people crazy when their kids aren't spelling things right, but they're doing such hard work to think about all of those sounds, and eventually they'll learn how to spell the word lizard. They can write their own stories. These can be stories that are make-believe or stories about their own life. And the story can be 1 sentence long. I rake leaves. That's a story. You can also have them label their pictures. That's like an easy beginning thing. You know, like, I draw a picture of me playing baseball. Probably I have 2 legs. And then I might label some different things. Robbie drew this picture. I had a picture of it. Anyway, it says ball, because he couldn't say his L's, so he was sounding out ball, and that's what it said. So you can label all the different parts. Robbie. So labeling pictures is great beginning work, and similarly to how when our kid first learned to talk, we were so excited and encouraged everything that they're doing. Like, when your kid is drawing a picture and they're like, look, I wrote my name. Yes, you did. Good job. We just encourage all the different levels of the things.
Millie just writes a bunch of letters and says, what does this say? Blah, blah, blah. You know?
Yeah, and I mean, that's fun. And she's starting to learn what they are. And then eventually she might start like,
Spell out the word mom like us and just give me letters, and I'm like,
like she might start putting spaces in because she knows that, you know, sentences have spaces in them. And then you might end up with like nonsense and then like her name in the middle of it.
She knows Mama and Love and Millie, so I get a lot of Mama Love, Millie Love, Love Mama.
And you can have them write responses to books. You know, you read a book and go write something about that story. What'd you think? Make a connection to the story. So in the classroom, we would call this next thing a guided reading lesson. And you would do it with like 5 children. But at your house, it's probably just you and 1 kid. Or a couple kids, depending on everybody's level. But here's kind of like a week guided reading lesson. So you're going to introduce a new book on Monday. So you might start out, first of all, by doing some word work. And you'll do one of the phonemic awareness or a phonics game. Maybe you'll do the troll talk game, you know, something playing with words. Then you're going to show them their new book. You're going to be like, this is a new book. It's about bats. And it's going to tell us everything that we ever wanted to know about bats. And then you'll take a picture walk where you look at every page and you talk about what's happening. You ask the child to explain what's happening. And if there's any sentence that what they just say is happening doesn't match what the text says is happening, you can feed them that sentence. It's not cheating, it's just making context. Then you're gonna have the child use their magic reading finger, and the child's gonna read the book. You're not doing a running record, you're just reading the book, they're reading out loud. You can use your cueing questions, you can help as needed. It's better to say, did that make sense? Instead of, no, look again. You want, instead of shutting down the work, you feed them a strategy so that they can keep on working. And they feel like, they're doing a great job the whole time. Then, after you finish the story, you're gonna do a cut-up sentence, where you just take a index card, and you have the kid tell you a sentence from the story. Like, maybe they'll say, bats fly at night. So you're gonna write this down on the index card. And you're gonna leave bigger spaces than I like between the words. And then you're gonna skip a space and put a period. And then you're gonna have the kid read the sentence to you. Bats fly at night. It should be easy, because they came up with the sentence. It's probably from the story, or related to the story at least. And then you're gonna take scissors and you're gonna cut these apart, including the period. And then you're gonna mix up the words, and they're gonna put it back together, and they're gonna read it again. If they need help putting it back together, you can give them a hint, like, sentences always start with a capital letter, so that one must be first. And then, there's always a special reading mark at the end of a sentence. Okay, so this one's last. So then, maybe they can get it themselves. You do some phonemic awareness things. Okay, bats fly at night. I wonder which of these words starts with a, this one. There you go. That's Monday. And you're gonna put those pieces in a Ziploc or an envelope. On Tuesday, you're gonna use the same exact book. You're gonna start with some word work activities. The child's gonna retell or remember what the book's about. Just talk about it briefly. And then the child's gonna read the book with their magic reading finger. Then you're gonna put the cut up sentence in order again. You can do it a couple times. You can cut it apart further. You can cut off ats. Depending on their level, you can cut bats all the way apart. You could cut, fly into fl and I. Just having fun. And then send them off to do some independent reading with their Just Right books that you already know is easy for them to read, so they can practice good habits. Wednesday, same book, word work. The child's gonna read the book again to you. You're gonna put the cut up sentence in order one last time, and then you're gonna have them write that sentence down into a notebook or a blank piece of paper. You can make a notebook by stapling some printer paper together. And then have them do some independent reading. On Thursday, same book. It's so boring. You're so sick of that book, but such good things are happening. So do some word work. Have the child read the book again. Read the cut up sentence that's written in your notebook now. You could glue the cut up sentence down, but if you cut it up a ton, that's just way too hard. Then you're gonna have them illustrate the sentence in their notebook. And the reason that we care about this is that the point is for their picture to match the words. So the bat had better be in the air flying. It better be dark because it's nighttime, because we are reinforcing that pictures and words go together. And then independent reading again. Friday, same blessed book. Do some more word work. Then you're gonna take a running record, where you're gonna put down your check marks, and we can use the real symbols, or you can use made up symbols to keep track of what your child did. And probably, they have this book because they've been practicing it so much. And then you can discuss the running record. There's probably gonna be some stumbles in there, even if they're all self-corrections. And then you add that book to the Just Right book pile. And have them read some more by themselves. I made that book go away fast. So that is the end of the slideshow. Let me give you this. There's all kind of things in here. It's just a random hodgepodge of activities. Thank you. So those are just some books to read aloud that do different things, some different strategies. There's a schedule for reading and writing, like this is more of a classroom schedule, but these are all different things you can incorporate into your day, like a read aloud, a guided reading, the child reading independently, saying, what did you learn about yourself as a reader today? What worked so well that you might try it again? Like those kind of thinking about thinking questions, writing. This is an official running record sheet, but you can just do it in your notebook. So this thing over on the side, does anyone care about this? If you, over here it says MSV errors and self-correction, MSV, and that stands for meaning, syntax, and visual. So you can go through and look at their running record, and let's do the looks for looked error. You can, like, what did they use to solve this problem? Like when they said looks, what were they doing? Like, did it make sense in the story? Yeah. Was the syntax correct? I mean, let's say yes, it was. And so, but what they didn't use is visual. They didn't look all the way to the end of the word. So, you could either write what they did correctly, or you could write what they did wrong, that you might circle the one that you want them to work on. Or if they went back and they self-corrected it, then you can say what they did to self-correct it was that they, you know, it just tells you. If you want to get that detailed. The next paper is 4 different stages of reading and some strategies that you want to demonstrate, like at the very, very beginning. Can they use pictures to predict the story? Are they looking through the word to the end of the word, little tiny skills? And there's 4 different stages that readers go through. There's a weekly reading log where they can write down a book that, you know, they did a great job reading, that independently that they thought they did. There's a little key at the bottom to color this little square if it was poetry, fiction, or nonfiction. Just to be thinking about those kind of things. And then on the back, you can do the metacognitive thinking part orally, or you can have them write about. This week I was successful at. Next week I plan to. Here's a real simple reading response sheet where they, you know, draw a picture, write something about the story. You can also do that in a notebook without anything. This is the if I can spell blank, I can spell car, I can spell far jar and char. This is a story map that you could fill out information about. Character, setting. This could be written or you could draw a picture. And on the back, upside down, there's some resources if you want to dive deeper into different things. At the very bottom, these two things are my very favorite set of easy reader books for teaching kids to read. I don't honestly know if that link still works because I didn't check it today. But you can go to Creative Teaching Press website, or you can go to Amazon and type in the author's name and the title of the book. You just wanna make sure they sell it in a pack that has like, I don't know if it's 12, one copy of all 12 books, but then they also sell another set where it's like a classroom set, so there's 5 copies of every title. You probably don't want to spend $100,000 getting 75 books, all which are the same as each other. So you should ask me questions. If you want me to make copies of this, I can.
I have a question. So my kids are in first and second grade, and I really like this running record thing. They go to public school, and I love that I'm getting this information because it's like a mystery to me, right? They come home with all this stuff on these check marks, and I'm like, I have no idea what any of that means. So thank you for giving me that. I feel like I solved a mystery tonight. Okay. But if I'm at home with them and I'm trying to identify a just right book for them, because I have first grade triplets and I cannot sit, like there's time when some of them are having to read while I'm working with others. And if I can find just right books for them to read while I'm working with the others, that's something they can do independently. So I got their running record system. Do I start with the sight word readers as my books to start with, to test them, to figure out which ones are independent? Like, is that a good starting point?
I would. What I love about those is that they are the predictable
Mhm.
text.
Mhm.
The pictures really match perfectly.
Mhm.
And I think it's called preschool, or what is it called? K first are just the easier ones,
Yes.
and then first and second are just a little bit harder.
Okay.
The sentence, instead of just being the dog can run, it's gonna graduate to, the dog can run, she is fast.
Okay.
The dog can sit, she is good. There you go. Excellent story.
Three of my girls are all in reading tutoring, and so most of the books they bring home from school are super frustrating for them, and it's just like a fight all the time. And they do what you were saying with like the frustration. I hate this book. I hate this. I don't want to do this. And so I feel like if I can get them books that I know that they can be independent with, maybe that'll help them feel encouraged. Because at school they don't get encouraged. They just get frustrated all the time. So.
And it's hard to find books this low at the library. Like if you get an
Yeah.
easy reader book, it's like
Yes.
astronomically harder
Exactly.
than any child is ready for at easy reader level.
Yes, and we've had that experience too, because I'll go to the library and they'll say, well, what level are they reading? And I tell them their grade, and they pull out these books, and I'm like, my child cannot, like, they can pick out, the cat, like some of those kinds of words, but there's some pretty big words in my mind,
Yeah.
and it's not fun for them, so.
There's these authors, their last names are Fontes and Pinnell, and they have written millions of leveled readers, and they have this whole like leveled reading alphabet system. And according to Fontes and Pinnell, when you're in kindergarten, you should be working on books levels A through D, and when you're in first grade, you should be working on E through J, and second grade is K through M. So you can see that in first grade, there's a tremendous amount of growth. That's a lot of levels. And then in second grade, like there's not as many levels and they don't change as much. They just get like a little bit harder, and you're like reinforcing everything that you learned in first grade. So if you can search for leveled readers and, these levels, and you might learn, we don't all have to look at this, but anyone who wants to, we can look at like what the inside of the books look like, and then you can get an idea of what level you'd wanna search for. Because like an A is I can kick. A B gets a little bit of a longer sentence. My little dog likes to run with me. My little dog likes to blank with me. Level C is maybe gonna be 2 sentences. She was sleeping on the rug. I said, wake up, socks. There's only 1 page for each level, sorry. So just gets, incrementally a little bit harder, a little bit harder. Level G is, I can't go to sleep, said Nick. Will you open the door, he asked. Nick's mom opened the door. Light came into the room. Good night, Nick, his mom said. If you wanna look up this up close, anybody, we can look it up.
So do you, like I noticed with Rowan when he's reading, names really bog him down. So do you just, is that, it's a name, so it's almost, I'm trying to think of a name that was in his book. It was like, I don't know, it was a long, it was, I don't know, he is, but I don't think it was that book. Anyway, it was just a name that I thought, I don't know if he'll get that, but do you?
You can tell them the correct name. If it's a stumbling block, they can just call him,
Well, I tell him to put whatever name you wanna put there.
Right, it doesn't matter.
Whatever name you know, just say it.
just,
It
if
starts with the
his
same
name
letter.
is, George, just call him G, or,
Okay.
it doesn't really matter what his name is.
I do
At
that
this
in
point.
Sunday school all the time. With all his Hebrew names. I'm just gonna call that
Right.
King H.
Definitely was there.
And who did you say was with those books?
Fontes and Pinnell. And everybody has kind of like, they're like famous. They have a total leveling system. I think there's a website, I think it's called A to Z Reading, maybe.com or something like that. And it's gonna have levels that are similar but not exactly the same. But it's you can print these yourself at your house. You might have to buy a subscription, I'm not sure how much of it is behind a paywall. But then you can print just right books at whatever level your kid might be at. I'm trying to talk to Anna Zackrell, the director of the library, to try to get some really beginner reader books. And like have them in bags of 10 or whatever, so you can check out a bag at a time and practice with them.
Like Bob books, where would those fall in that?
Is Bob like,
The little bitty,
Yeah.
like, that's always, I thought, like, a library wouldn't do well with that, because they're so little, and they're only like 5 or 6 pages, they would get torn up so easily.
yeah. But like that, I don't think that I like Bob books, cause I think they're more like, the Thin Tin Did Sit. And that doesn't make any sense to me. But Scholastic books, if you go to Scholastic book clubs, what would they be called? They might be called sight word readers. They might be called leveled readers. Will help you leveled readers. I'll try to find some links to some books and put them in the event chat.
Can I ask another question?
Yeah.
My girls.
If anyone wants to leave, you can leave.
Yeah, my girls are also in speech therapy. Have you worked with kids that have had speech errors? How does that affect their reading? I know it must. And do you have any tips on that?
My tip is that speech therapy is wonderful and you should start it as early as possible for the very reason that it's hard to sound out a word if your mouth literally can't make the sounds that you're trying to sound out. So it's just an extra hurdle for them. But
They're still really doing all the same strategies.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I mean, you can point, like when Robbie sounded out ball and he wrote ball with it, W, you, like depending on the time and the child's frame of mind, you can be like, hey, you sounded that out just the way you said it. We really say ball, and that's an L, you know?
Yeah.
But like, in a way that's not making them feel terrible about themselves. It's so hard to balance fixing their mistakes and building them up at the same time.
Thank you.
I don't know if this was helpful or if
Very,
it's just
very
like
helpful.
too much information or.
I have, Graham likes to look at the pictures and he will do that pause right in the middle and and I can watch his eyeballs, like, I'm looking at this picture. And then he's like, it doesn't match. So it's because there's more, like, in the beginning of the story, the dog was playing catch in the yard and the dog got tired and and then the dog jumped on the bed. Well, he's still up here reading, the dog played catch, and he's like, that dog is asleep. Where's the ball? And I'm like, they can't put every picture, this is the end of the pictures. And he gets and I'm like, just please just keep going. I am an impatient, I'm like, stop. But he doesn't like to, he wants to be able to read fluently, and if he can't, he will stop reading, and I can hear him, he's like, that dog ran by. And I'm like, if we could just read it, like, let's flow. The dog ran by, and then he has to pause again to figure out the next bit, and then he wants to, and I'm like, it's really hard to listen to you do that. Can we just like read the word as you do it? And oh my goodness.
And maybe using his magic reading finger will help. 'Cause if
Yes,
has
he
to
doesn't.
point-
I do it.
Take it
My
to
magic
it.
finger.
Oh no, your
points
finger's not
to-
magic. Only his finger
I
is
need
magic.
to tell him this magic finger business because that would be great.
But Maddie Grace, we took a wide popsicle stick and she blew like gems and a butterfly, and she'll use that like with her pointer thing, but she still wants me to do it.
Sometimes those arms are just too tired.
Right,
Sorry,
right.
I have a juice box. I mean, I can't do it
right.
all.
This is where
I need help.
I don't want to
That's all
like,
you're on.
lay upside down hanging off the couch and I'm already using both of my hands to hold the book, so I can't possibly, like, why
Well,
sit
it
at
might
the
help
table?
to sit at the table, because then you don't have to hold the book. The table does that job for you, and you only have to point. While also holding your butt in an upright position, which is very tricky.
That's the worst. I think that is what I miss most about school. I'm like, y'all have to learn how to like sit in a chair with your feet down there
And stay
and
for a short period.
and like just sit there. Do you think you could be like pulling out of the chair and mounting on the thing and doing this in a room full of people? Like,
Yes,
you can't
yes,
do
they
it?
can.
And they do.
Well, Cullen was doing your science work today in the recliner, kicked back, like with his feet up, and it's laid back, and I said, there's no way you're really doing exactly what, yes, I am, look. I was like, sit up, just at least sit up, why are you not somewhere else? The books are everywhere, so, I don't know, I guess if he hasn't, I don't know if he hasn't.
It drives JP crazy when the kids are doing their work wherever. And he's like, why don't you make them do math at the table? You know what? We have a lot of battles, and that one is not one I'm willing to fight.
We have a mother-in-law got Ella. Ella is like she's a fidgeter, and it helps her to be able to do that. It drives everyone else insane. No one else can do that. It's a distraction for them. But she got her one of those the bouncy ball that sits on the chair thingy. Yeah, and it has a little chair that it sits in, and so she can.
Does that help her?
Yes, but it's squeaky.
Oh,
And then after school, they want to take turns getting in it and like slinging each other up because it has caster wheels on it. I'm like, you know what? Thank you, but this has to go. I just cannot live here.
Ultimately, I would be home for bedtime, so I am gonna go.
Another sight word thing we do is writing the word on an index card and laying them all over the house, make a path, and then jumping
Fun.
to the card whenever he says the word, and that's just the best fun ever.
That
Like,
is.
that we have to like go forward and backward and do it again and again. And I'm like, I think you got them, buddy. Like, let's put these up for
I
today.
made memory, like a memory game, you know, with some sight words. I did it in mittens. I wish I hadn't done it in mittens, because now to make it more, I have to, we call it mitten match, so I have to cut out mittens. Anyway, I should have just done index cards, so it would be a lot simpler. But, you know, just making a pair and, you know, just playing memory until we found them.
Ethan and I used to use, they have little fly swatters that are shaped like hands. And so lay them out and he gets to call out the word and let's try to be mom slapping it. You know, there's the, I got it first, mom, and that he gets that card, you know, and so that's how he likes it, he gets it, mom.
Thank you, Lauren.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Bye.
They had some kind of bug. There were flies by each of the words and they had a fly swatter and whenever you tell the word that swat that fly that was beside the word.
Yeah, that was his favorite sight word game, I think. He would play that every day.
If it gives you any reassurance, my kids go to public school and they still come home and do their homework the same way that you don't. So I don't know if that would really fix your trouble.
The lies I tell them. You know, if you went to regular
Right.
school. But you know what? None of them have ever been, so they're just gonna believe you.
That's right. You make their reality.
So mine has been, and I can still say, you wanna go back to school? I mean, and they're like, no, that's okay, because it's so long compared to, you know, we spend half amount of time, I guess, with what they have, but it still works, hopefully it'll continue to work for a little while.
That days. Most of the time they're content being home, but there are some days, some kid that says, I'm trying to go to regular school. But usually it's the, okay, well, I have to, you know, get up at 6:30, drop you off, and I'll be back in 1, 2, 3, 4, this many hours, and they go,
Never mind.
all right, well, I think I'm okay. You are too. I think you are.
I have a question, Laurie, for older kids, I know you have older kids, so you probably know. You know, you read so much when you're researching curriculums about the importance of reading as a family to your child. What do you do when your child doesn't like for you to read to them because you read too slow? And they're an extremely speedy reader, and if they read, I cannot comprehend what they're saying, or the story. So what do? Just give up on that, or do you still try to get them to listen to the story you read?
I wouldn't give up because I love reading aloud so much that I would. They'll be 45 and I'm still gonna read them a bedtime story. I mean, I think you can have her read to you, but you just have to. You're reading for an audience right now, so you have to slow it down. Part of fluency is expression and reading well, so, and that is a good skill to learn too.
They don't do any reading in your creative writing, do they, out loud?
I mean, sometimes they share their story. They're brave enough.
Yeah, I don't think she does
Audiobooks,
that.
would she listen to audiobooks? My
Yeah.
kids love audiobooks, that's the only thing that keeps them quiet in the band, they're little, but.
I hate reading aloud. And we read all the little book, we usually will read the Knotgrass books that go with that. I just finished Rabbit Hill, y'all. Which I love the story itself, I would love to read it in my head. All of those words, and I love like old literature with fabulous fancy vocabulary. I wish we all talked like that all the time. I just love it. My kids are like, I don't understand why they have to use so many words to just say dumb, he was dumb. Like, why do they have to say like 4 sentences with all these big words to say he was dumb? And I'm like, it's so much prettier, and it was nicer. And like, what? Why would you not want to use the word intelligent instead of smart? And they listen, you know, I think they tune me out a lot, but I just hate, like, I'm so tired of saying words out loud. But I think I'm a pretty good out loud reader, and I think that's like Natalie, some nights, I'll say, hey, how about you read while I go get a shower? And she's the only one that will not do the voices, I don't do voices, but you know, you put a different emphasis, if it's the mom talking or the dad talking.
Right.
And she can do that if she's in the mood, but the others, if they're reading out loud, it's just a monotonous da-da-da-da-da. So that might be something, say, okay, Autumn, you don't have to listen to me read, but why don't you read part of your chapter or whatever book and get her to almost act it out. I mean, you are almost kind of acting it out.
Yeah, it's like a performance.
By the way, Farmer Boy, maybe when you were talking about the pole shoot, I still do not know what half of those contraptions were in that. And you know what's so funny, we read it last year, and the kids several times have been like, you remember in that book we read about the kid on the farm, remember that thing they were doing? And I was like, I'm a visual person, and to have something explained, like the tools used to carve the wood, and you put this stick over this stick, and then the vowels were drawn over the, what are they making? I could not figure it out. Could you give me a picture? I don't
That's
know
when I
how much
like
they got
picture
from
books.
it. Yeah. But I would just, like, okay, that's our chapter for tonight. And if they didn't ask, because I'm gonna say, I don't know, Google it. Like, what idea? I still don't know half the things that family builds in there. Oh, I can't picture it.
And that's called Farmer Boy?
Farmer Boy is by Laura Ingalls Wilder.
Yeah, it's in the Little House series, it's like.
Yeah, it's like, it was her husband, I mean fictional, when her husband was a little boy growing up in cold as blazes, where it was like upstate New York, I think. And so, like ridiculous winters. I did, like we would stop a couple times and go, oh my gosh, can you imagine that much snow and ice? Like, what? Or having to go and like sprinkle water on all of their little plants because the late frost came. But the seasons and the weather was crazy. You know, here it would still be like sweating outside, and they were, you know, already in 4 layers and under 4 feet of snow. But it was old, so it's got, you know, kind of that older sort of twang to some of the words that, and they would say, what are they saying? What do they keep calling that guy? I'm like, well, you know, have to. Natalie does not like, we just talked about this the other day, she does not like reading books that have a dialect in them, where there's apostrophes that take out parts of words, and I was like, you know, I don't either. I hate that. It takes me the first chapter to like say it in my head, like I've gotta get this accent down to figure it out. But yeah, reading those out loud is not fun, cause I have to like stumble through it, and they're looking at me, I'm like, hang on. Okay.
That's where Graham gets it.
Figure this out.
Let me
He
figure
does not
this
listen
out
to
first.
anything. You know, all of our kids, we read to him when they were teeny, you know, little, you know, even when they don't even know. And he would never let us read to him. He would go get a book, he would climb up in our lap, he'd hand it to us, we would open the book, get the first word out of our mouth, and he would climb down and walk off. And, you know, he was almost 2 before we realized he was blind. Like, maybe that's why he did, because he couldn't see it. But then after he got his glasses, it didn't really, still didn't want to be read to. I always joke, I tell the kids, you know, the first kid got all the attention and all the phonics cards and all the like daily quizzes in preschool, and the last kid, bless his heart, but no, they're all good readers. I'm just not a very patient reader teacher.
I have one really good reader, and then the youngest one, he's in 4th grade, but he's probably on like a 2nd grade. I would even say we're doing 100% 1st grade reading level, because he didn't care anything about it. He doesn't wanna know, and he'll read, and he'll look, there won't be a picture, but he'll look all over that page, and it'll be the word A, and he'll say, what? And you know he knows what, he knows A, but it's just like he doesn't, I don't know, I struggle with him. But Cullen was fine, like he was reading, both of them were in school. Cullen went until 3rd grade and Rowan went until 1st grade, and even like his teachers K-5 and first grade, they said, you know, maybe reading, like tutoring, and then we started homeschooling. So, I think it's gotten better, but I don't know, maybe some of this will help. Cause math and different things like that he's great
Some of
at.
that stuff she said will help build his confidence.
Yeah,
Like you said, he knows, but he's not confident enough to go with what he
Right.
thinks.
yeah, sometimes I think it is a confidence issue, and then I think, did I do that? Because I struggle with spelling too, like when Cullen's writing something, I'm like, that's not the way you spell that. Let me tell you how to spell that. I'm trying to just say, spell it however you want to, but I have to turn the other way. So, and maybe I do that with reading with Rowan and I don't realize it. Maybe I say, no, that's not it, you know, and maybe I discourage him more than help. So,
Well, they say for every negative feedback comment, you're supposed to give at least 5 positive feedbacks to like cancel it out. Which means you have to say a lot of nice things, a lot of times. It's really, really hard to achieve that ratio. Like about reading or about cleaning your room or about anything in your life. It's real hard to say enough nice things to balance out the criticism.
I know, right? We're gonna be saying nice things right here until they graduate high school.
I remember that, I heard a quote or something, I don't know who said it, I'm sure it's true though, that when your children get older, that, you know, voice inside their head is their mother, what you said to them, and I'm like, not a very good encourager.
At what point do you start to like worry, like they're not getting it? I'm not at that point, I'm just wondering.
Like in public school, they won't even test a kid for a learning disability until 2nd grade.
Cause we're 2nd grade and probably, I would say reading at like maybe the D level, like kindergarten level, so I'm just wondering.
I can also tell you that in South Carolina, the public schools follow the Read to Succeed, and you can look it up online.
Oh.
And if they aren't reading at, the expected level by 3rd grade, they'll retain them.
Okay.
So, I don't know if that gives you any extra information, but you can Google that, that's for our state.
I'll also tell you from my 4th grader, we had homeschool friends that, cause he's the baby and, you know, kinda started over, cause we have a foster who's almost 2, but anyway, he struggled, just really didn't care, didn't even wanna try, and some friends were like, well, that's what our youngest did too. And after 2nd grade, it just clicked, and she
That's what
read
I
like
heard.
that whole summer.
I've read that
It
like
didn't
don't even
happen for
worry till
Ethan
they're
after
like
2nd
8.
grade.
Not
Like,
either.
It happened last year, somewhere in his 3rd grade year,
Okay.
and it clicked. Now, he still does not love to read at all. He doesn't. He doesn't mind being read to so much. He likes to read when he has an agenda, I think, like we'll be reading history and just all of a sudden he'll stop me in the middle of a sentence and take over and start reading. So he can do it, but I think that's like, okay, I'm gonna rush along, you're not reading fast enough, or I'm bored, cause he does get distracted easily, you know, and so he will. But I'm just saying, don't freak out too quick, because after 2nd grade and he was still like not getting it, and I'm like, I'm thinking there's some sort of disability, you know, there were times it seemed like he wanted to read the words backwards, and but not really severely, but you know, and I'm like, you know, is he dyslexic, what? It just, I don't know, there was some point in the 3rd grade year when it clicked, and I feel like he's reading where he's supposed to. I mean, certainly his history, he's reading it well, you know, to me, so I don't know if that gives you any encouragement.
Yeah, it does. I mean, it's just always hard to know, cause when you're not like a trained teacher, it's like, okay, well, I know like kids, it's normal for them to mix up letters or write letters backwards, or, but like at what age is it no longer normal to do those things? You know, it's hard to be like, I don't know.
He did all that until he
Yeah.
read well, like the D's and the B's,
Mhm.
lowercase D's and B's
Yeah.
backwards, until he read well. And like I even watched him today, and he's like, he was spelling a word, and he's like D, and it took him like just a split second, but he, you know.
Yeah.
I don't think he even has to think about it most of the time, but just kind of get back into the school year, some of those things. So that's my word of advice, cause I was about to start freaking out and be like, okay, we gotta get you tested and. So.
It's so hard because for your whole life, like, this is a water bottle, this is a water bottle, this is a water bottle, this is a, and then all of a sudden you introduce B, D, P, and Q, and they're only one thing when they're a certain way.
Oh, yeah.
You know, like, D is this,
Yeah.
B is this, P, Q. Like, all of a sudden, all the rules that you've always learned of your whole life about how things work, suddenly there's some things that it doesn't matter which way you look at them.
And what's funny, I don't know what the connection is, there'll be times like, they love to type anytime they can, you know, and I'm like, if it makes you want to do the assignment, so like for Nate for creative writing, he'd rather type it up than write it, you know, and I'm like, whatever helps. There are certain times, even on the keyboard, you know, Ethan might be like, which one's B again, you know, here, and so I don't know why, you know, what that, you know, means, but anyway.
One of the other challenges that with kids that are having trouble reading, I don't know if you experienced this doing it, you know, in homeschool, but in public school, once they get to second grade, they're expected to read all their math word problems, all their reading tests, everything, and if your child isn't reading on that level, like, they don't do well on anything. And it's really frustrating
that's
for
why
them
I'm
and
really
for me as a
thankful we're at
parent,
home, 'cause
yeah.
I'm like, how would you do this at a, you know?
It's,
At school,
yeah,
so.
I think that's great that you're
Yeah.
able to,
Have you ever heard, cause some of the teachers, when they were at school, told us that boys it takes them a little bit longer with their maturity, I guess you would say, with reading. Is that just?
Yeah, I have noticed that. I think of the children that I taught first grade, and of the kids that I suggested be retained, only one of them was a girl. So that's probably like 7 out of 40.
I only have boys, and mine seems, I guess, not when we have boys, it's a birth order thing too. I don't know if you put much stock in that, but like Aaron just caught on to everything easily. You know, and homeschooling him, I'm like, this homeschooling's gonna be easy. Aaron read quickly, read early, read above his level, you know, caught on to everything. You told him one time he had it, you could read anything to him, he retained it all. You know, details that I'm having to look back in his history after I just read it to him and asked him the question. He's like, yeah, it was 1865. And I'm like, yep, you're right, you know. But the others, they learn differently, and I'm having to learn how they learn because they don't learn the same way.
Because everyone learns so differently. It is just.
I'm visual, I can't
It's
have you
blown my
read
mind.
history to me and expect me to
Right.
retain it, but Aaron can't. And I'm like, you know, I can hear things, but I have to, you know, I can listen to audiobooks or, you know, iPodcasts or whatever, but I have to be washing dishes
yeah.
or driving or doing something with my hands.
Right,
And I just sit there and listen to it and
Be home.
and the others are very different. Their learning styles are like,
I look forward to figuring
figuring
those out.
those out. Thank you, Lori, for
Yeah.
doing that.